Hey there, freaks and geeks. Now, I know it's been a few days since I last put out a video. I think it was on Saturday that I completed my series on Silent Hill Homecoming. And then since then, I've been flipping through my catalog of games to see what I want to play next. I'm thinking about currently maybe Silent Hill Downpour, just to compare and contrast the last two major Western installments in the franchise. However, I've also been reviewing more retro games for my catalog, so I have quite a few horror games and other assortment of games that come from the PS2, PS1, and even Sega Saturn era. I'd like to go through those, but I'm kind of stuck on whether or not I should emulate these games, which would be a lot easier to just edit and then upload to YouTube, or if I want to go out of my way to record from authentic hardware and try to upscale it. But anyway, in the meantime, I've been rewatching House of the Dragon, which is probably my favorite show on HBO at the moment, and I'm desperately waiting for season 2. And in the process, I got inspiration for this video. I'll be honest, I just didn't want to edit anything complex. Yes, you can call me lazy. I'll happily accept and agree with your assessment right now. I wanted to rank all the monarchs in order, or at least in a tier list, from S rank to F rank. I'm going to pick the monarchs that at one point or another sat their nasty little glutens onto the Iron Throne. So here's my tier list. I'm not going to include Robb Stark or Stannis, as technically they never sat on the Iron Throne. They never ruled in King's Landing. I'm going to go from Aegon the Conqueror to Tommen, and I'm using quotation marks, Baratheon. All right, but I'm not going to cover Robb or Stannis. Just so you know ahead of time, this list is definitely objective and 100% correct. So if you disagree with me, just know you're completely wrong. Obviously, I'm kidding. All right, so let's start with Aegon the Conqueror. Hopefully, I placed all of these portraits in order. I can't guarantee that I did, but I double checked before I started the video. So the first one is Aegon the Conqueror. Okay, so really I should have a picture of Aegon with his sister wives, Visenya and Rhaenys. Aegon was, if you're not familiar with the books, Aegon was rarely ruling from the capital on his own. Now that George R. R. Martin confirmed that Aegon's purpose for unifying the nation was to protect humanity from a quote-unquote northern threat beyond the wall, I'm going to put him on S tier. But like I said, I really should have a portrait of him with his sister wives, because they definitely ruled together. Aegon, when he was not at court, usually left King's Landing up to Visenya or Rhaenys. But yeah, I'm going to put him in S tier. The purpose that George Martin stated is now considered canon to both the books and the show, I believe. Granted, Aegon did not subdue Dorne, so technically he did fail at this mission. And technically his conquest did result in tens of thousands of lives being lost. Just ask House Whore. Oh wait, you can't, because they were all burned alive. They all roasted alive in Harrenhal. But his rule seems to have been rather just. I like that he didn't try to enforce his Targaryen practices on the continent. That would have not gone over well. There was no religious crusade, for example, enacted against the North and the Iron Islands. He pretty much just left them alone to practice their disparate religious traditions and cultural traditions. And he recognized that these disparate lords needed to retain a great amount of independence, otherwise there would just be constant rebellion. So I think I'm pretty satisfied putting him in S tier. Okay, so next up we have Aenys, and I've heard his name pronounced many different ways. I'm going to say Aenys, but unironically I've heard streamers call him Aenys. I think my pronunciation is probably a little better, so I'm going to stick with that. So Aenys was born of Rhaenys, and he inherited her softer, more artisan disposition. He seems to be a good man, but he wasn't a good king. There was a lot of rebellions breaking out during his rule. So let's see. Where should I put him? I think I'm going to put him in B tier, because for the most part, he did maintain the peace And even though he arguably should have taken more militaristic actions against, for example, the Iron Islands, I do think that his rule was peaceful and he was a good man, right? So I'm going to put him in B tier. I think that's appropriate. All right. Moving on to everyone's favorite spawn of incest and dark magic. So we have Maegor. I believe Maegor ruled for about 6 years, a little over 6 years. He's remembered as the Cruel because, well, there's a large host of reasons. Although it could be true at the same time that the Septons and the Maesters have exaggerated some of the claims about his cruelty. For example, he did wait, technically, for his half-brother Aenys to die before claiming the throne. Also, arguably, the realm needed someone far more stern at the time to keep the continent unified. Oh god, there's motorcycles passing in the background. Hopefully you don't hear that. Another weak monarch likely would have lost the Iron Islands at the time, and the neck even, to successful rebellion. So at some point you have to admit that even though he was cruel, his militaristic actions did make sense. That said, I'm still going to put him in F tier. Yeah. Assuming the stories about him at least are partially true or more true than false. Yeah, because to some extent his cruelty almost did divide the continent anyway, right? So I can see someone taking both perspectives, that yes, you needed someone who was more militaristic than Aenys, but at the same time, because Maegor was so cruel, he lost a lot of his initial support along the way. All right, so he was succeeded by his nephew, King Jaehaerys, the youngest son of the late King Aenys. So Jaehaerys is known as the Wise, and unlike Maegor, he ruled for a long time, I think over half a century. And unlike Maegor, he resolved many of the issues previously brought up. For example, he ended the faith militant uprisings. He drew up some legal standards that applied across Westeros. Like Aegon, you also have to include the fact that his wife, you have to basically think about his wife Alicent when judging his rule, because the good queen Alicent listened to the women across the realm and to tackle many antiquated practices. I think this is when you start to see lords' rights in the north start to be abolished. She fortified the wall also by extending the gift, even though that likely did upset House Umber. It at the same time allowed the Night's Watch far more resources and allowed the Night's Watch to continue patrolling the wall. So I'm going to put him at S tier, and let's see. Yes, I'm going to put him even before Aegon, because I think overall his rule is probably one of the best rules of the entire history of Westeros. Yeah, I don't think it's really a surprise that I'm going to rank the old king as S tier. In fact, now that I think about it, he even peacefully averted a succession crisis, right? So at the end of his rule, basically all of his children were either disinherited or they left Westeros for one reason or another. And by calling a great council, he's one of the rare Targaryens that had the foresight of realizing that he didn't want a civil war to take place after his death. So that leads us into Viserys. Now, Viserys is going to be a hard one to judge because the book counterpart is slightly different from the show counterpart. Both depictions do show a good man who upholds the peace during his reign, and he did love his family. The TV version is, I think, far more sympathetic, however. As you can tell, he's desperately trying to keep his family and the realm united, despite their petty rivalries. Let's see. I'm going to put him at B tier. Okay. I'll put him below Aenys only because of the actions that he didn't take to avert a civil war, unlike his predecessor. Yeah, so he didn't really... I'm going to argue that he really should have done more towards the end of his life to avert the Dance of the Dragons. He did retain a strong peace while alive, but he really needed to be more proactive before the twilight years of his life, when he noticed that the fractions were forming inside his own family. Yeah. So I think B tier is fair enough. I mean, if you really think about it, Aegon, his son, his eldest son, didn't want to be a king originally. In the TV series, at least, if you remove the Hightower sympathizers from King's Landing, you could have probably averted the conflict, the dance, entirely. Now, in the books, however, his brother and his mother, Aegon, right, Aegon the Second's brother, and his mother were far more involved. So I don't know if that's necessarily true in the books, but in the show, at least, I do believe that Viserys could have taken more actions to actually avert the dance. Okay, so yeah, I'm comfortable putting him in B. All right, so that brings us to the only queen sovereign so far, at least, Rhaenyra. Now, technically, Rhaenyra isn't officially recognized by most historians, but she did sit on the Iron Throne for a few months. Unfortunately, if I'm judging by the monarch's reign alone, so not their life outside of the reign, but while they were on the Iron Throne, she was rather terrible. Granted, she wasn't a catch-22 at the time, since the Crownlands had nearly all of its gold reserves displaced by the Greens before she even arrived. But raising taxes at a time when the people were already starving was inevitably going to result in a revolt, in my opinion. I don't necessarily blame her for trying to fix the financial damage done by the Greens and the dance, yet she did seem unaware about how angry the small folk were. So I'm forced to rank her an F. However, I'm gonna put her above Maegor, because I don't think she was as terrible as Maegor. Fortunately, if you're an advocate for the blacks, you'll be happy to hear that I don't rate Aegon II much better. As you probably know if you watch the show, he was a scoundrel, totally uncommitted to his wife, Helena, totally uncommitted to his family, his children. He was no great military leader either, unlike Aemon and Daemon. The Greens started the Dance of the Dragon with a huge tactical advantage in both the books and I assume the show. The show is following the books rather well, so I'm going to say that's going to be true for the show as well. And yeah, nearly all the continent south of the Riverlands was either siding with the Greens or was just not going to mobilize in the first place. And yet, ultimately, the war, I mean, the best you can say, that was a Pyrrhic victory at the end. The fact that he was self-aware in both the books and show that he'd be a terrible king is probably the best trait he displays. And yet by the end of the war, he turns this victory, like I said, into a Pyrrhic victory by refusing to listen to his own advisors. So the small council, including some of his closest allies, like Otto Hightower, are begging him at the end of the war to sue for peace before the Stark army arrives to besiege King's Landing. And of course he refuses, and when he refuses, he's assassinated, which kind of cements his reign as short and ultimately forgettable. I'm going to put him in F tier. Honestly, these two are interchangeable. I am going to put him worse than Rhaenyra, just slightly, because I do believe that there were actions that he could have took, far more actions he could have took, that would have elevated his reign and at least prevented his assassination. In terms of Rhaenyra, I do think that she should have been more in tune with the needs of her people, but she was in a catch-22, so I'm not going to blame her as much for the situation she found herself in. Okay, let's see. So next we have, Aegon III, which is Rhaenyra's eldest surviving son. I think I'm going to put him... Sorry, I'm doing this live, so I have to think about this. I'm going to put him in C tier. Okay. Yeah, he was pretty much taken advantage of, if you're not familiar, because this all occurs after what we've seen so far in the show. So this is Rhaenyra's eldest son, born of Daemon, right? So not her bastard children. I guess I'm kind of giving spoilers for what's going to happen. He was pretty much taken advantage of during the Regency period after the dance by political vultures. I think, like, for example, House Peak was trying to manipulate him for at least a few weeks. They literally trapped him inside the Red Keep for a few weeks as a young lad. He came to power actually very young and broken, traumatized by the war, traumatized by literally watching his mother be roasted alive by a dragon. I think the one major respite in his life later on was learning that his brother Viserys, so Viserys II, was still alive. Again, this is kind of spoilers, but Rhaenyra during the Dance of the Dragons tries to send Aegon and Viserys to Essos to ensure their safety, but along the way, the Triarch attacked their ship, and Aegon was basically forced to abandon his brother. He jumped on his dragon and took off back to Westeros. Luckily, Viserys didn't die, and later on during Aegon's rule, Viserys returned, and that seems to have stabilized Aegon III's mood. But unfortunately, during Aegon's depression, he made a fatal mistake. He essentially allowed the last of the dragons to die out. Now, there is a conspiracy that the Maesters were poisoning the last dragons, because the Maesters, at least in the books, desire a world without magic, most of them, with some rare exceptions like Marwyn or Merwyn. I think it's Marwyn. So it might not have been entirely his fault, but he didn't seem to care that the dragons were dying off, at least until the end of his life, when he realized that the Targaryen rule was now easily challenged without dragons. Fortunately, he wasn't really a ruthless king, so that's kind of why I'm giving him a C. He also maintained the peace after the dance. Yeah, he performed his duties as much as you would expect from a traumatized boy. So that's why I'm going to put him at C tier. Let's see. Now, his oldest son, Daeron I, he's most known for conquering Dorne, but that was actually really short-lived. In fact, I think his rule was only 4 years, so similar to Maegor. Not anywhere near as cruel, in fact. I know Jon and a lot of the young men that we read about in A Song of Ice and Fire look up to Daeron as a folk hero, but he did have an incredibly short reign. It's kind of like a flash in the pan. I do think that he has some of the coolest quotes from the entire history of A Song of Ice and Fire. Basically, he's the one who says that when he talks about conquering Dorne, a lot of his advisors come up to him and say, yeah, that'd be awesome. We really do want to fulfill Aegon the Conqueror's mission, but your grace, we don't have any dragons. And he's the one that says, I am the dragon. I think he actually says, a dragon stands before you. And that's just a fantastic quote. It's basically like the Westerosi version of a Churchill or Jefferson quote. But like I said, he didn't really accomplish much. He lost Dorne. So I'm going to put him in, let's see, C tier or B tier. I think I'll put him in B tier because he still, other than the war with Dorne, he still maintained the peace, and he seems to be at least beloved by his contemporaries. So, yeah. Okay, let's keep on going. So now we have Baelor the Blessed, which was his brother, Daeron the first brother. Okay, so Baelor, before I even started this video, I found Baelor incredibly difficult to rank. On one hand, him apologizing to Dorne. Yes, he did actually go and apologize to Dorne for what his brother did. That accidentally helped the realm, because in the process of apologizing, he pledged his nephew, I think it's his nephew, Daeron II, basically. He pledged him to the Martell family in a wedding pact. And that's eventually what did bring Dorne into the Seven Kingdoms. He was also incredibly loved by the small folk. Not only was he pious, as everyone probably knows, but I mean, he was pious to the point of fault, right? He walked barefoot all the way from King's Landing to Dorne just to make amends at Sunspear. But he was also pious in other ways that I think are more useful. So he made sure every person in King's Landing received at least a daily supply of bread. So I would actually rank him very high if we're only considering the first part of his reign, because at the same time, his religious beliefs slowly became more, well, they're progressing towards zealotry. Let's just put it bluntly. He allegedly died over fasting over a month long. I say allegedly because towards the end of his life, he was pushing for basically his religion, the religion of the Seven, to be forced upon the rest of the kingdom, which in my opinion would have almost certainly caused, if not an Inquisition period, then outright civil war. You would have the North, the Iron Islands, even some families in the Riverlands, like the Blackwoods, would have probably not tolerated that giant forced conversion effort. He also was a little extreme in regards to sexuality, so he locked up his sisters in the Maiden Vault to preserve their virginity. Or I guess I should really say try to preserve their virginity, because it didn't really work. The timing of his death, however, actually does kind of elevate him because of that grand pursuit where he was eventually talking about unifying the entire realm in this holy religious war. That never happened. So because it didn't happen, I'm going to... none of his outlandish attempts really manifested. So I'm going to put him at the top of B. Again, if he had continued to live on past the point that he did, then I think he would have ultimately caused another civil war, perhaps even a worse civil war than the dance. Because then if you're talking about religious fanatics fighting each other, that's not going to end well. But like I said, that never happened, so I think B is a good place to put him. All right, so now we get Viserys II. So yes, we're jumping back a generation because Baelor, as you probably know, never had children. Viserys II gets a B. Ooh, but where should I put him? So let me justify why I'm putting him as B. So basically, the reason I'm putting him as a B, maybe even an A. No, I'll keep him at a B. Basically, he was the true leader of the government during the reign of his brother, Aegon III, and his nephews, honestly. So there was a delicate peace maintained after the dance, and I credit that almost entirely to Viserys for basically reining in the worst impulses of his family. So actually, I'm gonna give him an A. All right, he did maintain a peace, other than Dorne. He did maintain a peaceful realm through the reign of 3 monarchs with completely different personalities. So yeah, I think he deserves an A. So I'll put Viserys II as an A. However, his son, Aegon IV, gets an F, and I'm going to put him even below Maegor. Okay? Yeah. I don't necessarily care. I know technically the realm was still at peace while he was alive, but Aegon IV is just absolutely terrible. So take every complaint I had for book Viserys and multiply it by a factor of 10, if I'm being generous, maybe 100. As you can tell from the image, he was so gluttonous that towards the end of his life, he couldn't even move. He inappropriately, he was very lust. How do you say this? Filled with lust, because he's most known for siring a bunch of bastards on both commoners and ladies alike, aristocratic women. And towards the end of his life, one of the most unforgivable things he did is he legitimized a bunch of these bastards on his deathbed, which basically led to the Blackfire rebellions occurring for generations to come. He also bestowed the Valyrian sword Blackfire, which at that time was seen as a physical representation of the Targ dynasty. And he bestowed it, instead of giving it to his son, Daeron II, he passed it over to his favorite bastard, Daemon Blackfire. Yeah, so he was a complete mess. He basically is the reason that we see almost a century of war continue on with the 4 Blackfire rebellions. The only positive thing I have to say is that some of his children, like Bloodraven, are incredibly cool characters. But that's not going to elevate him personally. So yes, he gets an F. Okay, now we have... Okay, I'm thinking this... Just double checking, making sure the portraits are who I think they are. Yeah, so this is Daeron II, Daeron the Good. So unlike his namesake, ironically, he brought in Dorne, but using peaceful means, a marriage pact. I think he was honestly one of the most fair kings, probably fair to a fault. He tried his best to avert the original Blackfire Rebellion. I'm going to rank him as an A, and I'm going to put him ahead of Viserys II. Yeah. I'm going to rank him as an A, and probably ahead of Viserys. Unfortunately, after like I said, he was fair. He tried to avert any conflict with his bastard half-brothers, I guess you could say. Unfortunately, when the war did occur, and when he won the war, after he defeated Daemon Blackfyre, he was forced to punish the lords that did side against the crown. Even in Dunk and Egg, we read that these punishments, I mean, they rarely included executions. He didn't go that far, like versus Maegor. Maegor would have killed everyone. But he did have to confiscate and redistribute land, which built resentment even 2 generations later. Honestly, though, I don't know what else he could have done. He died from the spring sickness about, I think, 20 years into his reign. Don't quote me on that. And then he passed his crown down to Aerys I. But like I said, he is the one that is fulfilling the original goal of the Conqueror. And he brought in Dorne, the Seventh Kingdom, peacefully. So I have to give him credit for that. Let's see. So his son, Aerys I. So Aerys is known as a rather bookish Targaryen. So he doesn't seem to inherit a lot of the dragon fire spirit of a lot of his relatives. One cool thing about Aerys is that he seems to be was highly interested in magic. Bloodraven, for example, was his hand. So we can see, Bloodraven got involved in a lot of the magic as well. So hopefully we learn more about Aerys and Bloodraven in future books or future adaptations. Thing is, Bloodraven was his hand, and we know that Bloodraven was in control of a lot of the day-to-day operations. So I don't know how much we can actually attribute to Aerys. This is gonna be hard. Okay. Well, I'll rate him as a C+. Yeah. A C+. It's kind of hard. Again, we don't really know much about him. Granted, whether it was by his hand or not, whether it was him or Bloodraven, I do know that he did assist his people through a rather terrible drought, and I do believe he put down another Iron Island rebellion. The Iron Islanders are constantly rebelling, so that's not a big surprise. So yeah, I'm going to put him as C+. Then, okay, yeah, I'll stick with that. All right, now we have Maekar. Maekar? I never know how to pronounce this guy's name. All right. I'm going to rank him as a C+ as well. They're about even, honestly. Yeah, I do know that he seems to be a lot more stern than Aerys. Somewhat more ruthless. But yeah, I think I'm comfortable rating him as C+. I do know he was one of the best military leaders in the dynasty, the Targ dynasty. So he was Prince of Summerhall, and he won several tourneys, I believe. And he marshaled his own men in battle against at least 2 successful Blackfyre. Well, he was successful against 2 Blackfyre rebellions. But again, we don't really have much information to go on, so we don't really know much about the 3rd Blackfyre rebellion at all. But I mean, again, he did maintain the peace for the most part. So yeah, I'm comfortable with that. Okay, so we're nearing the end. All right, now we're going to go on to the next S-tier king. And let's see, I'll put him... him and Jaehaerys. I'm not sure. Well, I'll leave him right there. Like I said, he's the next S-class, and just a little spoiler, he's probably going to be the last S-class that I put up here, and that's pretty pathetic that there's only 3, but whatever. So we have Aegon V, also known as Aegon the Unlikely, or by his close allies and friends, Egg. So Aegon V essentially represents what a benevolent monarch should be. He's like a platonic ideal for a king. As a child, he went on tour around the kingdom with his personal knight and best friend, Duncan the Tall. I definitely recommend that if you've not read those books, read them. They're written at a lower level, like they're not as gruesome or graphic, as A Song of Ice and Fire, but they're still great books. And Egg and Duncan are fantastic characters. In the process of touring the kingdom, he came to learn about the various conflicts and lifestyles that permeated the Seven Kingdoms. If you're not familiar with who this guy is, Master Aemon was his brother. And Master Aemon was originally offered the crown after yet another succession crisis. The nobles actually wanted Aemon to refuse or to step away from his vows, but he refused. And this led to Aegon V. The noble lords were rather reluctant. Many of the higher lords didn't like that he lived amongst the common folk for so long. In fact, one of the things they didn't like about him was that he made a lot of strides to helping the common folk. Let's see. Yeah. God, I'm still thinking, should I put him ahead of Jaehaerys? Nah, I'll leave him there. Yeah, in fact, he's probably one of the most noble kings. So when Bloodraven was still around by the time that Aegon rose to power. And at the time, during the council to determine who was going to reign, Bloodraven lied about the crown, granting safe passage to one of the last Blackfyre heirs who wanted to make his claim known in King's Landing, and Bloodraven killed him as soon as he showed up. So Egg, even though he did love Bloodraven, he enacted justice, and he sent Bloodraven to the wall. In the process, he did something even better. He reinforced the wall with new recruits, so he cleaned out the Red Keep dungeons, and he also allowed Bloodraven's loyal men to assist him up north. I think he sent about 200 people up north to reinforce the wall. He wasn't a great fighter, unlike his father, but despite that, I don't think he participated in any of the major battles, but despite that, he still led a victory in the War of the Nine Penny Kings to great success. He made significant overtures to the major houses, including through marriage. So here we have like the Baratheons, for example, were instrumental in putting down the last Blackfyre rebellion, precisely because he reached out and married them into his family. So yeah, I think I'm going to keep him there. Okay. Now we have Jaehaerys II. I'm going to put him as probably A tier. So he was kind of a response to his own father. Now, ironically, both Jaehaerys and Aegon V married for love. They didn't marry within their own Targaryen family, but Jaehaerys forced his son, Aerys II, to marry his sister. So it's kind of weird. Again, we don't really know much about him. In fact, I think in the show, they even cut him out entirely, don't they? Yeah, they basically get rid of him and just say it goes from Aegon to the Mad King, but that's not really true. But again, we don't really know much about this. Hopefully we learn more. The Mad King, we're going to put as F. Ooh. Let's see. Should I put him below? See, the thing is, for the first half of his reign, Aerys was actually a rather decent king. He had these giant infrastructure projects that he wanted to set up. He wasn't as focused on helping the small folk as much as his grandfather, Aegon. But at the same time, he wasn't cruel like Maegor. Unfortunately, towards the end of his life, as we all know, he got insane. So there's no way I can in good faith put him above F tier. All right, now we get into the non-Targaryens. So we have Robert. Robert Baratheon is going to be D tier. So I definitely think he's above all these others. Actually, should I even put him at D tier? I'm going to put him at C tier because with the exception of the Iron Islands once again rebelling, as they always do, the realm remained relatively peaceful. He did what he had to in terms of bringing the major houses together. It wasn't really his choice. It was Robb Arryn's choice that he had to marry Cersei. And like it or not, that was a smart decision. to ensure that the Lannisters worked with the Baratheons to maintain, because you have to realize there were a lot of Targaryen sympathizers after Robert's rebellion was even successful, correct? I mean, that's how you had Dany and what's his name? Viserys the Third. Like, if he was crowned, he'd be Viserys the Third, right? Yeah, we had sympathizers that literally escorted Dany and Viserys first to Dragonstone and then off to Braavos. But you also had sympathizers in the Stormlands. You had sympathizers in Dorne, obviously. So the fact that he did maintain a peace for about 2 decades, I think that grants him at least status as C tier. Okay, Joffrey. Oh, man. Joffrey is definitely F tier. As a person, Joffrey is honestly the worst. Like, if I was ranking him as a person, he goes down by Aegon IV. Because at least Maegor was good in terms of battle tactics and being strong and being brave. You can't really say that about Joffrey. Obviously, when we saw Stannis besieging King's Landing, he basically almost wet his breeches. If not, he probably did, honestly, pee his pants. God. I'll put him slightly better than Aegon, and that's only because the people around him, I think, were more competent. Obviously, talking about Tywin. Tommen, well, as of the books, Tommen is still king, and I think he'll be the only one that I rank D tier. Now, Tommen can either go up or down. Again, if I was ranking Tommen as a person, he's just an innocent, stupid kid. I'd probably just rank him as A or B. But he is being manipulated on all sides by the Tyrells and his mother. And one of the worst decisions he's made is to arm the sparrows. So we're going to find out if Winds of Winter ever comes out. That was a very terrible decision that Tommen and Cersei made. So, yeah, that took a while, but it hit 37 minutes in. But I think I'm rather confident that this is... I could probably switch around some of these, but this is... Yeah, I feel good about what I made. So, again, this is 100% objectively true. If you disagree with anything, then please leave a comment to prove that you're wrong. See you guys later. Bye.